Assalamu alaikum class. Hopefully you all doing fine. In the series of lectures on principles of management, today we are looking at the final part of the environmental influences chapter, the module fourth. Remember yesterday we were looking at the internal environment and also the task environment. In this particular section, we will be discussing the factors that are slightly far away from the organizations, may have a direct or may have a mostly have an indirect impact on organizational work. We classify this environment as the journal environment. It is an external environment, but it's slightly far away. Therefore, these include factors that are mostly common to multiple industries. These factors definitely affect organizations in many ways. These include forces from the economic, technological, demographical, and social factors that affect organizations in many ways. Of course, these are factors that are influencing multiple stakeholders, including employees, customers, investors, competitors, community, and many more. So, therefore, generally, the consensus is that managers have little or minimal control over these elements. They, however, may cast a very profound impact on any firm. For example, we were looking at economy or economic forces. The general economy has a definitely has an impact on organizations in the form of the economic indicators. For example, the unemployment rate. Once the unemployment rate, for example, is high, it means people don't have jobs in a particular area, and therefore they are willing to work at lower rates, and vice versa. Of course, a strong economy, a progressive economy, has a profound impact on buyers. Their buying habits tend to improve, or their buying power multiplies. So, therefore, it casts an impact on their buying patterns and behavior. A weak economy, therefore, affects in many ways. Otherwise, people don't have ample money to save and therefore are not in a position to spend money on luxury and additional items. Now, if you look at other factors, there are multiple other ways the economy may affect, but we definitely looking at a summary of these forces. If you look at other factors, it includes technology as one of the major influence. We also looked at technology as a trend in the second chapter, second module. Whereas the technological forces impact organizations in the way they transform items, especially from the system perspective. Organizations are there to transform inputs into outputs. So the technological elements may definitely help organizations to efficiently transform the activities. But then it results into new opportunities and new forms of threats. If you are able to capitalize on the technology, you have advantage over many. And if you are unable to do that, it becomes a threat for you. Especially the information technologies and specifically the internet based, the e-commerce based technologies. They are now having a profound impact on the organizations. These technologies tend to make your products obsolete. You are no more able to sell these products at a premium price, and also affects the way you manage your people, your resources, your infrastructure. The rise of the smart technologies is one of the examples where you'll be able to manage them efficiently with low waste and be able to comply to sustainability standards as well. So therefore, technology is one of the major force, and infrastructure is also technological infrastructure also helps organizations or impede its performance. If a country and a region has a technologically good infrastructure, multiplies and helps organizations' performance. Shifting to the social culture forces, we call it the societal culture, is a profound impact, most likely indirectly through customers, through employees, and through suppliers, and through employees. It definitely influences the way people behave. Of course, different societies have different influences, and they have habits that add up to people's behavior. Values, norms, and practices generally constitute organizational practices influenced by the society and national cultures. Has been a very strong debate, research, in which we're looking at differences in the national cultures based on national values. And there are some patterns that are available for managers. They be able to grab upon these and be able to manage that across different cultures. The cultures also evolve over time and therefore they cast a profound impact on how the people behave. Let's look at the demographic forces. The demographics are basically the indicators of the nature of the population, how it is composed, what sort of uh, attributes could be attributed to demographics. I think education, the gender, and many more could be attributed. They cast an effect on your workforce composition in many ways. And also, it indicates a lot of things about your consumer groups, who they are, what they believe in, what their uh, characteristics are. This definitely multiplies opportunities or reduce those opportunities for your products and services. For example, in the last 20 years, women have recently have jumped into the workforce, not only in the low ranks but also in the higher ranks, and therefore uh, this has created a sort of a diversity at workplace. Also, many of the European countries, industrial countries, are aging. That is, their workforce is getting older because of their low populations, and therefore they limit their ability to efficiently work, and therefore inviting immigrants from the other countries. It also calls for extensive support for health and insurance and assistance in having a uh, flawless life at a higher age. Therefore, your cost for living, cost for health may rise, and therefore organizations need to adjust accordingly. And you are working in a country where such demographics are, you need to also take care of these factors that are there. Definitely, once we move into the globalization chapter, we'll be looking at major global differences that are there. Political and legal working environment. This is also legal environment generally. An influence on the working conditions, therefore, is also a major force affecting from the environment. These vary from country to country, from region to region. And these are often seen as the laws, legislations, the cast an impact. Recently, we have seen the rise of the legislation as far as the social responsibility is concerned, specifically from the environmental concerns. And these definitely cast a serious effect on the way you manage your products, your production, you develop your goods and services based on these elements. It has recently been a lot of compliance required by companies in terms of the environmental pollution, and therefore they cast a huge impact on the way you work here. Of course, rights for humans, especially fair and just treatment at workplaces, have also been the spotlight of the legislations across the globe. A good manager, therefore, keep an eye on these factors because they don't want to develop a workplace which has issues in terms of legalities. Finally, but not the least, organizations definitely have crossed national borders and they are becoming global players. And therefore, need to manage global pressures. They are definitely facing competition from the uh, global forums. Also, because they focus is on to uh, generate profits across the globe, but then it has its consequences where you will be facing a lot of variation in global the legal uh, elements, but also the lot of variation in the consumer demands across the globe. It has greater opportunities, but greater risks of failure are there. We will be discussing the global environment in detail once we will be focusing on globalization as a chapter in the uh, next module. Of course, managers are more concerned about environment once the environment is troublesome, uh, dynamic, and ever uncertain. Therefore, most of the managers will be facing the issue of environmental uncertainty. Uncertainty is where the managers have little information about what the factors are contributing from the environment and what their impact will be. So they are unaware of that. So environmental uncertainty is a serious concern for a lot of managers. It includes two factors. The environmental uncertainty is comprised of two major elements: degree of change and degree of complexity. In fact, a 2 by 2 matrix is available in our textbook, which calls for analysis of environmental uncertainty from the combination of these two elements, the degree of change and degree of complexity. Its maximum uncertainty is with the high degree of complexity and high degree of change. Now, the complexity is basically about the total number of items in the outside environment. If the number of players, like more suppliers, more distributors, more competitors are there, you will be having higher degree of complexity. Whereas the degree of change is the level of change occurring well within the those factors, how much they are changing. For example, how much customers' moods and needs are varying, changing. If there are a lot of number of customers and they are constantly changing, you will be facing a situation which reflects in cell 4, where is maximum uncertainty is. This environment is very dynamic and unpredictable. Lot of components and components are not similar to each other, and there are a lot of changes continuously happening within those factors, and you are definitely not in a position to address to all those changes, and you're not in fact aware of those changes. Therefore, cell 1 is very predictable, very stable, and cell 4 on the contrary is to the next stream is very unpredictable. Whereas as a combination of cell 2 and cell 3 are available, where some elements are stable and easy to understand, while others are very dynamic in terms of complexity and change. Of course, our focus on environmental study is cell 4, where there's a high degree of change, and therefore you're not aware of what sort of threats and what sort of opportunities are available for you. Now, as a manager, I would love to know how to respond to environmental uncertainty. The book has recommended few options, necessary reactions, guidelines for today's modern managers. The first one, adapting to environment, requires a more philosophical, a perspective change for managers. Managers should understand that once they are having little control towards the environmental forces, they cannot control these. So they need to adapt to these elements. And for adaptability response, you need to have a structure for that. Therefore, the book suggests that at least you should be able to react and adapt to those changes that are there in a way. If you have a model which is very rigid, strong, bounded by rules and regulation, high formality, I mean you're having a bureaucratic approach, bureaucratic or mechanistic culture model that you follow, you are definitely not in a greater position to adapt and to be able to be flexible enough to change it. The book suggests that at least a passive response to environmental uncertainty, at least a response is to change your structure from a highly bureaucratic to an organic structure. For that, you need to empower people, enable people so they are able to take decisions at their own end. High level of complexity requires organizations to respond back with higher degree of ability to adapt, and therefore a bureaucratic model is not in the position to support that. Ideal for stable situations, for stable environment, but most of the organizations now facing cell 4. So therefore, they need to change at least on organic level. This was at least responsive. The book also suggests there are proactive ways to manage environmental uncertainty. Some definitely have their ethical considerations, like this technique, which is called the boundary spanning. A boundary spanning technique in which you appoint one of your elements, employees, to be working rather as a spy, as a gateway to information to one of the environmental factors like your competitor. You see, the white circle represents your employee who is now going to your competitor, which is the right hand circle, uh, develop friendships and gather as much as information as he or she could. You are deliberately sending him or her to gather insightful information. Now, why it is required? Because in most of the cases, the latest developments, the research work, the latest innovations are hidden from the outside world. Usually, companies don't leak this information and not readily available in the public. For that instance, companies may appoint boundary spanners who are deliberately going and attaching themselves to different stakeholders like government, like to community, to competitors, to distributor, and gather information for them. At times, this goes beyond the limits and therefore has its ethical and legal considerations. And there was a case in the book where a software company employee was found stealing codes from another company's office. He was there as a boundary spanner, deliberately working and working with one of the friends around there and was stealing information from his office and caught red-handedly. There was a case against that particular company. The boundary spanning has its ethical considerations, and companies may, because of this, uh, have serious consequences. But then perhaps people know that in business and love and war, people believe that everything is just and fair. Boundary spanning, therefore, is one of the techniques that are available. Some companies definitely follow that because the surface level information could be gathered through another technique, which is called environmental scanning. You look for journals, you go in trade shows and look at business expos to see what the competitors typically are doing. But generally, they hide the information from others and just leak minimum information so that their idea is not copied. So the organizations therefore looking for more informal techniques like boundary scanning. However, recently we have seen that organizations purposefully create relationships with other firms so that they are able to share information. We call this philosophy as a stakeholder relationship. So the final thought in this chapter is to manage your stakeholder relationships in a way that you are able to exchange information, key information with each other. You create a long-term relationship. This has recently evolved from the relationship marketing concept, the customer relationship movement, or one-on-one relationship approach. So we have seen the emergence of this from the marketing domain, but now it is applied across all aspects of the businesses. Also in management, we use this technique to create long-term purposeful relationships with most of the stakeholders. We see stakeholders as anyone who has interest in the company. So it includes customers, employees, unions, shareholders, community, government, and many more. We need to list those external stakeholders according to stakeholder relationship theory. We then prioritize which are the most important. The investors may for therefore be top most stake important stakeholder है. But then we cannot ignore others there. That's the stakeholder relationship theory suggests. We need to develop a purposeful relationship with them. Once we move ahead in our module, we'll see that some of the new concepts that the companies now take upon, like the corporate social responsibility, are also based on this theory, the stakeholder relationship theory. Stakeholder that the organization must develop purposeful relationship with stakeholders. Once the stakeholder relationship is there, you are then be in a position to exchange information as partners, not as competitors, not as enemies. Rather, you develop relationships almost all types of stakeholders, including customers, including distributors, and including others. Once this will be there, you will be very well aware of what your partners must be doing. This stakeholder relationship approach is very useful. In fact, the most comprehensive technique of managing environmental uncertainty. Many of the recent partnerships, definitely among competitors, which result into mergers and alliances, definitely start from here. And therefore, they are in a better position to very well aware of what their partners are up to, and they are very well aware of what the changes are coming from the environment. So we could see that at the least level of environment uncertainty, we at least need to change our structure into a flexible model so that we're able to adapt to changes. We classify this as a passive technique of managing the environment uncertainty. A progressive, proactive technique could be boundary spanning, or at least could be environmental scanning, looking for information formally from the environment through research, through attending expos, and to look at newspapers and many more. But the height of reducing the environment could be developing stakeholder relationships so that organization be very well aware of what their partners and stakeholders are thinking about, and therefore will be able to manage things. Managers therefore need to be very well alert of the internal and external environment. We could suggest that good managers are careful assessors, constantly sensing their environment and carefully analyzing changes that are coming from the environment, are in a better position to adapt and be able to look to influence their environment better than others. Therefore, open system theory uh, calls for managers to take care of those environmental influences. I think that's it as far as this module is concerned. That is the end of the module. As far as the environment is concerned, we will be focusing back on some of the key challenges facing modern organization in referring to globalization and then to corporate social responsibility in the upcoming next modules.